So I thought I'd try to do something a little different this time and talk about pet peeves. You know what pet peeves are. They're those little things that just kind of get under your skin. They're not really important, they just bother you. Looking at you, glottal stop T. Oh, by the way, if you also are not fond of the glottal stop T, please hit the like button and not the like button. Where was I? But that's not what my video is about today. My video, as all my videos, is about comic books and movies. So this is a comic book and movie pet peeve. I'm Tony Frazier, author, blogger, near genius, and this is a special pet peeve edition of Hero Go Home Presents Special Pet Peeve. No, wait, that's not. Oh God, here comes the music. Fine, just go ahead. So anyway, pet peeves. The pet peeves I'm talking about today are the pronunciations of the names of two characters. One Marvel, one DC, one hero, one villain, both bald. Now the first one I want to talk about is this guy. You may know him as Professor X, leader of the X-Men. Now if you've watched any of the movies or cartoons featuring this character, you've heard his name pronounced like this.
I'm Charles Xavier. Would you like some breakfast?
I am Professor Charles Xavier, also known as Professor X.
We'll be all right, Scott. My name is Charles Xavier. I'm a mutant, like you.
Who are you? My name's Charles Xavier.
Name's Xavier. Charles Xavier. How do you do?
Amy.
Heterochromia was in reference to your eyes, which I have to say are stunning. One green, one blue. It's a mutation. It's a very groovy mutation.
So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that this name is actually a real name in the real world, and it's pronounced like any other word in the English language that starts with X, like xylophone, xenophobe, Xerxes, Xena warrior princess. That is to say, it's pronounced Xavier, which means it's kind of annoying when I hear people deliberately mispronounce it. So why is it mispronounced so commonly? To the point that even classically trained Shakespearean actors like Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen would go along with this.
Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know. My single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live.
And of course, the answer to the second question is money. But the answer to the first question appears to all go back to Stan Lee. Stan Lee was the co-creator of the X-Men with Jack Kirby, and he writes about the creation of the X-Men in his book. Oh crap, now I need to find the book. Hang on. And he wrote about the creation of the X-Men in his book Son of Origins, in which he said that what set the X-Men apart from other characters was that they were born with their powers, that they were mutants. So he came up with the name X-Men to mean people with something extra. And in order to emphasize the X-ness of that, he had the group led by Professor X. Well, the only name in English that he could think of that would start with an X was apparently Xavier. But in order to emphasize the X-ness of it all, he pronounced it Xavier. And it has been a part of official Marvel canon ever since. Which brings up the question, if it's part of official canon, why do I keep insisting on pronouncing it Xavier? Well, there is the idea that people are the authorities on how they pronounce their own name, which is why a lawyer here in Tulsa can advertise on TV under the name Colbert, while a pretentious comedian on national TV can pronounce it Colbert. My problem is that it just bothers me. It's just like, say you were watching this show on TV, and every single character in the show insisted on pronouncing the lead character's name Jonas when you know it's pronounced Jones. Jones is a real name, it's a common name, everyone knows how to pronounce it, but everyone in the show not only pronounces it Jonas, but nobody ever calls attention to the fact that it's being pronounced in a non-standard way. That's what the Xavier thing does to me. And see, here's the thing. I'm not alone. Most of the videos you see on, say, YouTube talking about the X-Men will pronounce the name Xavier, but every now and then someone will slip up and pronounce it correctly. And even in the movies, someone slips up occasionally. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Hank McCoy, the Beast.
Professor Xavier started this school. Perhaps it's best that it end with him.
Now, I have almost exactly the opposite problem with this character, whose name you've probably heard pronounced like this.
Lex Luthor, the greatest criminal mind of our time.
What's the meaning of this?
The meaning of this is, Luthor, you're through. We have all the evidence against you we need.
Lex Luthor.
Lois Lane.
Philanthropist, bibliophile, true friend of the Library of Metropolis, Mr. Lex Luthor.
Me? Stop! Okay.
Oh yeah, those Luthors do love an epic criminal scheme.
Who's the maniac who was driving that car?
That would be me. Lex Luthor.
So what's my problem with this? Well, it turns out that Luthor is actually a real name in the English language, only it's spelled L-U-T-H-E-R. This character's name is spelled L-U-T-H-O-R. And just from reading it, you would probably be justified in thinking that it's pronounced Luthor. And if you thought that, you would be exactly right, at least prior to 1978. Take a look.
You can't defy the world and get away with it, Luthor.
Welcome, Luminians. I am Lex Luthor.
But here's the funny part. It's actually still pronounced that way, at least in the cartoons. Look.
Any last requests? Luthor, I have to know.
Not to mention the evil genius and brilliant leadership of myself, Lex Luthor.
We're not here to hide, Luthor. We're here to clean up your planet's mess.
Then by all means, let's get started. And call me Lex.
You don't have to keep pointing that weapon at me, Karen.
The warden says I do, Mr. Luthor.
So why is it pronounced one way in live-action movies and TV series and pronounced another way in animated movies and TV series? Well, I think that live-action, they don't really look at the source material so much as they just look at other live-action adaptations. And so it's kind of the mainstream pronunciation. Whereas the animation, sticking more closely to the source material, takes more pains to pronounce the name the way it was originally pronounced. But why did it change in the first place? Remember, I said that it changed in 1978, and I believe it all comes down to one person, an actor named Gene Hackman. He's the guy who played Lex Luthor in the 1978 film. The thing that originally brought this to my attention was reading an article where a guy talks about how Ned Beatty's buffoonish character Otis always mispronounces Luthor's name as Mr. Luthor.
Otis! My robe! Right away, Mr. Luthor!
Listen, Mr. Luthor, maybe this guy that flies is just sort of passing through, you know?
I'm back, Mr. Luthor!
Yes, I was just talking about you. You're followed again. It's one of those cat-like reflexes.
Now, at the time I read that article, I practically screamed at the page that no, he was pronouncing it correctly, because it had always bothered me to hear Luthor pronounced Luthor. But I've since come to believe that it was basically Gene Hackman who didn't want his character. He wanted one of the... But if you read enough articles about the making of Superman the movie, one word that you'll find that keeps popping up is verisimilitude. The idea that they wanted to make it seem like reality. And so I think that this was a choice by Gene Hackman to make his character seem more realistic, or at least more verisimilitudinous, by pronouncing his name like a real-world name. But the funny thing is, nobody else got that memo. So you'll find that not only does Ned Beatty consistently pronounce it Luthor, but the only other person who pronounces his name in the movie also pronounces it Luthor. That person being Christopher Reeve as Superman. Listen.
Now, this is California. Richest, most populous state in the Union.
I don't need a geography lesson from you, Luthor.
So why, when you have two actors pronouncing it one way and one actor pronouncing it another way, did the minority pronunciation, so to speak, become the one that took over? Well, it's due to a very natural prejudice. Like I said before, we let people be the authorities on how their own names are pronounced. And even though Gene Hackman's name wasn't actually Luthor, the character he played had that name. And so people just kind of naturally assumed that that was the way you should pronounce it. And since nobody on the movie had ever corrected his pronunciation, well, that pronunciation just sort of became natural. The other interesting part about all this is the fact that you have actors pronouncing the same name different ways and nobody ever corrects them. Even though, for instance, say Superman only heard Luthor's name from Luthor himself and never saw it written down, so he had no reason to pronounce it Luthor instead of Luthor unless he had learned his lines from a script. In the same way that Dr. Hank McCoy had supposedly been a friend of Charles Xavier for years and yet pronounced it differently from the way Xavier himself did, or, Xavier. So anyway, like I say, it's a pet peeve video. None of this is really important, but if you're interested in leaving a comment and telling me what you think, go ahead. I mean, it's a free country, right? I don't know when the next video I make is going to come out. I've got several kind of in the planning stages and various stages of writing, but I'm not sure what direction I want to take the channel. I may start doing things like the super movies column I used to do on my blog herogohome.com. So we'll see. Thanks.